Hello, everybody. We're going to spend a little time today comparing the different groups of states fighting in the Civil War: the Union in the North, the Confederacy in the South, border states in between. In the last week or so of class, we have studied reasons why the Civil War began. Of course, slavery is the biggest of those, but the states' rights issue, the economics issue, the sectionalism issues are all part of it. Plus, you've been working on a timeline putting together 11 different events that sparked the war into action. Once the war gets started at Fort Sumter, Charleston, South Carolina, April 12, 1861, both sides have to figure out a strategy and how they're going to go about trying to win the war. So today we're going to use some statistics to show you what the strategies may possibly be. So what you need to do is have this map going. Actually, you probably don't need to get this out, but at least we'll show you what states are Union, those northern blue states and a couple of western states. They're also over on the clock wall there in our room. Red Confederate states, they want to break away from the United States and form a new country called the Confederate States. Those blue states want to preserve the Union as one nation. That's why they're called the Union. The green states are called border states, not neutral by any means, but their populations are bitterly divided. All of those green states allow slavery, but they don't ever actually join these 11 Confederate states in trying to be part of a new country. All the brown area out here is called territories. There's not areas that had enough people yet to become states. Here's a list of those Union blue states on the left side of the screen and territories on the right. And also, border states are on the left. The 11 Confederate states trying to create a new country are in red on the right side of our screen. Now, what we're going to do is use this piece of paper. It's on the back of your volunteer enlistment sheet. You already have this paper. You don't need to go get another one. You need to find this in your AC notebook. And what we're going to do is use crayons or markers or whatever, 3 colors, blue, green, and red, to indicate how much of each of these statistical categories are controlled by the North, the South, and the border states. And I mean, like, the whole box here would represent the entire population of the United States, all 30 million people. And it will kind of show the proportions of how much of that is North, border, and South. Same with all the agricultural crops, the animals, the railroad mileage, the economic things, and money in circulation and such. So we're going to use those same colors. You want to be sure you have a blue, a red, and a green, or something very close to them so it matches the map. So let's start with population. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit while you go ahead and color, but if you are not finished coloring by the time I'm ready to move on to the next screen, you're welcome to pause the video, finish the coloring, especially on some of those where there's a lot of different boxes. But as far as population goes, you know, you need a lot of people to fight a war, people to do the fighting, people to do the things that need to be done on the home front. So the Union in blue has, I don't know, what is that, roughly 60% of the population. And then another maybe 20% or so are in border states, which are divided between North and South. The South looks like it has maybe a quarter of our population. Keep in mind, about 4 million of those people are slave. And, well, Southerners aren't going to have a very successful time getting those slaves to join the Southern Army and fight to keep slavery. So that's population for each side. In agriculture, food and cash crops, corn, wheat, oats, and rice are things that you eat primarily or sell. That's what a cash crop is, something you're growing to make money. Well, the North has a good deal of the balance in their favor for corn, wheat, and oats. The South has all the rice, although we really don't grow a lot of rice in America. South has all the cotton. That is their big cash crop. You don't eat cotton. In fact, we have a phrase in our culture: if your mouth is really dry, you might say you have cotton mouth. It's kind of disgusting to put in your mouth. The South has it. Cotton is king in the South. That is where their money comes from. The South is very agricultural. About 90% of people in the South make their money off the cotton industry, either in growing it, planting it, harvesting it, transporting it, processing it. The English economy over in Great Britain relies on American cotton, so that's their big tool they want to use to help win this war. Tobacco is a crop you grow as well and sell or smoke, and we don't have cigarettes yet in those days. They're smoking pipes or cigars primarily. The North doesn't have a lot of that because the growing season is just not long enough. We do grow some tobacco in southern Pennsylvania, southern Ohio, but not a lot. and cotton and rice. We just don't have a hot growing season in the north like you need. And you can pause the video here if you need to before we move on to finish coloring those boxes. Livestock. Well, you need horses to move the army in those days. Horses are a lot of the power. And the north has a, well, maybe half-ish, something like that, maybe slightly less than half, slightly more. Southerners will tell you that northern horses are just no good. And northern factory boys don't know how to ride them anyway. Now, Southerners probably a lot more successful in the horse business, even though they don't have as many. So cavalry soldiers ride horses. Artillery soldiers have their cannons pulled by horses. Officers ride on horses. Horses move the ambulance and supply equipment. Mules do too. Mules are actually more durable, a little more expensive, and maybe a little bit more stubborn. But that's how we move the army. Yes, we are starting to use railroad to move the army in those days, to move the military equipment, but that's not caught on yet. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Cows and beef cattle, of course, used for dairy products and beef products. This will help feed your army. Sheep, you can eat their meat, plus you also use their wool for uniforms. Both North and South are using a lot of wool to make their soldiers' uniforms because it's more durable than cotton or other products. So at least the top layer of your uniform is probably going to be wool or some kind of combination of wool and something else. Swine or pigs. Maybe you haven't heard that word swine before. These are pigs. You can use them for food products, and they preserve meat in those days by salting it. So soldiers are going to eat a lot of salt pork. Even if you like salty food, this is going to be an awful lot of salt. You probably have to soak it in something to get some of the salt out before you can eat it. Or you slice salt pork down like bacon and cook it up in little thin strips. And that way you can handle the saltiness maybe a little bit better. Railroad transportation. Railroads, we learned about transportation earlier in our semester, and we talked about, new roads and highways and new types of water transportation, canals, river boats, clipper ships. We also talked about railroads a bit. The big boom will be after the Civil War. But the North has started building lots more railroad miles, and the South has some. They've not really caught on as much. In the South, also, the railroads are not as uniform or not as organized in the North, meaning in the South, there are a lot more companies that have different size tracks and different size engines with different size wheels. So it's harder to transport things a long distance by railroad in the South, even though it looks like they have maybe a quarter of the railroad mileage. Well, it is not as smooth an operation as in the North, where you could move things longer distances without having to unload off trains, load onto the next size train, offload that onto the next size train. A little bit harder in the South to transport things a great distance. Industry, well, we definitely had our Industrial Revolution, and in the North, that caught on really well. The North can make all kinds of manufactured stuff because there's a lot of factories, a lot of workers. They create a lot more value of goods. It's easier to turn your factory into a war manufacturing facility than it is to turn a cotton plantation into a war manufacturing facility. And so it's difficult for Southerners with not a whole lot of factories, not a whole lot of people to work in them, to create a whole lot of war materials. Finances, well, a lot more money in the North. As you can see, they've got roughly, 2/3 maybe of the amount of money in banks, and 50%ish or so of the amount of money just out there that people can use. So the North has a big advantage when it comes to money. And you're welcome to stop the video, back up to any slides you need to finish the coloring part. What's your analysis of how well each side is prepared for war? Well, if you've done those boxes well, you have a lot of blue on that paper. The North has a lot of advantages. They want to use those advantages to win the war. They want to use the industrial strength, the money, the railroads, the population to crush the South. The South has some disadvantages, and they don't have a lot of people, don't have a lot of money, don't have manufacturing. How in the world can they win this? Well, they're going to rely on help from a foreign country. Because, the British, maybe they want to get some of this territory back. The British are kind of, in some ways relying on Southern cotton, which they want to continue coming into their economy. They also have lost the Revolution. They've lost the War of 1812. they've had some embarrassing moments with the North, so maybe the British would like to help the South. The French, maybe they would like to help the South. Remember that Louisiana Purchase where the French sold a whole big chunk of land for really cheap out here to the United States? Do you think the French have ever had second thoughts about that? And maybe they'd like to get some of that back. Well, you could do that maybe if you're the French and you're helping the North or helping the South win the war. So the South is going to be just like the American Revolution. They're going to try to get foreign help to win. They probably can't do it on their own. They're going to need foreign help. And that's going to be a large part of the South strategy. So now we've got some strategy for each side based on some of their advantages and disadvantages. And what you're going to do now is move on to some other stuff in class. But if you need to go back and look at any of these slides over again and get some of the colors finished, now is a great time to do that before we move on to something else.